So this is Jorge Rivera with FirstCoast.tv. We have, it's a privilege here to be with two authors, and they have a new book that's coming out called Belonging, the Civil War South We Never Knew. And my first question is to Judy. Well, let's introduce ourselves. Your name is?
Judy Sherrer.
Okay, and your name is?
Derek Hankerson.
Okay, and these are the authors to this wonderful new book that's coming out. And so my question to Judy is, what brought about this book, Belonging, the Civil War South We Never Knew?
It started after I finished my first book. There was some research that hadn't gone into the first book that came up and came out, and I thought, oh, people still want to know this. And then, as research often does, it grew. And one door opened another door, which opened another door. And then Derek and I have a mutual friend who learned of my research, and Derek's, and said we should meet. And Derek and I finished each other's sentences and realized we need to put this together. There's a lot here to know.
Oh.
And so that's what the second book became.
Okay. So this other question is for you, Derek. How did you both meet?
We met through Gary Hyatt, who actually went to high school with Judy in Dunedin, Florida. And Gary knew of my work with reference to the unique West African or African heritage of Gullah Geechee. And also Gary knew of Judy's first book dealing with the character that's in her book, Cassie, who was a slave, and she is reported to be Gullah. So he put two and two together and connected us, and now, as Judy just mentioned, we're working on the third book, and this is part of a trilogy.
All right. So here's a question to Judy. In a synopsis, what is this book about?
It's about continuing Cassie's story, who was from the first book. But Cassie was defended in court. She grew up in Tennessee, and she was defended in court by G.A. Henry, who's related to Patrick Henry, the American patriot Patrick Henry. So it's Southern. It's a Southern story. And then as I began seeing what was going on with history, the number of things that started to go together, including where Cassie was from. Her story mirrors a lot Solomon Northup's. You know him. He wrote a book, but they did a movie on him, the 12 Years a Slave.
Oh, okay.
And she even lived in Washington City, like he did. And so as that grew and grew and grew, I realized there's more here to tell. And then as that happened, I learned more about the South, because G.A. Henry's family letters, correspondence, and then the archives in Frankfurt found her original trial records. So there was a lot of source information there to put together or figure out if it's connected or how it's connected. He went and fought for the Confederacy at one point. I had many people ask me, why is he fighting for the Confederacy now? And I said, I don't know. Well, I found out through family correspondence in their letters. That's with the Filson Society in Louisville. And by doing that, it placed more together. And what I was finding about the slaves that were in the South, I was starting to come up with those that fought for the blacks that fought for the Confederacy. And I thought, I didn't know about this before. So there was that searching that was going with it, and it was tied to G.A. Henry's family, and why it made perfect sense with his letters once I read his letters that were for the South.
All right.
And so that's how it all grew.
Oh, okay.
And if you think about Judy's statement with reference to blacks that fought for the South, we have to remember that between 1700 and 1775, tens of thousands of West Africans settled on Sullivan's Island, and Sullivan's Island is right next to Fort Sumter. And in fact, by 1790, 78% of the low country, we're talking low country of South Carolina's population, was black. So white people would assume or logically deduct that blacks, number one, did not live in the South and blacks did not fight for their home, which was the South, to me is ludicrous and preposterous. So yes, blacks did live in the South, and blacks fought for the South. And if you look just at our tapestry exhibit that is here in St. Augustine, that's at the Visitors Information Center, that exhibit explores 450 years of African, or actually it explores 450 years of indigenous people's lives here in St. Augustine. That goes back 450 years, and those indigenous people were who? Native Americans, Africans, and Spanish, or Europeans. In addition, if you look at last year's Journey exhibit, that dealt with 450 years of African and African Americans experience in St. Augustine. So right there, that sets the case, or that sets the stage for the Africans' presence in the South. So how people can assume or deduct that blacks didn't live in the South or fight for their homeland dating to the Civil War, or better yet, the American Revolution, is beyond me.
Okay. And so here's my next question is, did either one of you have relatives who fought in the Civil War on the side of the Confederacy? We'll start with you, Judy.
You just opened Pandora's box. My family had slaves, yes, and they lived in the northern part of Kentucky, and they had a famous slave. And nobody ever told me about my history. And I wrote about this in the first book. It's called All Bones Be White. It was while I was searching for Cassie's family, I found my own history and Cassie's history of what happened to her. And in my family, I was told nobody ever fought in war. As far as they knew, nobody ever fought North or South. And this was Kentucky. And it was both. Right. So they could have just picked one, but they didn't. Right. And I encouraged Derek to look on his side of the family, and he said, I think I know, but I'll look, I think I know. And he asked me if I had looked. No, I've never looked. I don't think there's anything there. Well, there is. I found out. And 20-something fought for the Confederacy, and 20-something fought for the Union, which totally matches the other part of the history I know. The slave that Mr. Gaines owned was Margaret Garner. Are you familiar with Margaret Garner?
No, I can't recall.
You want me to take a minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
Margaret lived with the Gaines family in Richwood, Kentucky. And when what came up with her happened, some of the people who were going to fight for the South quit, and they just fought for the North. Some who were fighting for the North thought they needed to quit and fight for the other side. And that's why my history got all jumbled up. I didn't even know this for 40 years. But Margaret tried to run away, and she had children with her and her husband who lived down the road. And she wanted to get away from slavery. His parents came with them, and then my relative just got mad that she was running away, so he started chasing after her. They were going to Cincinnati. She thought they were in a safe house when they got there. It was just took like a day, 2 days. So the second day they were getting there, and she heard that he was coming in after her. She picked up a knife, she slit her child's throat, and she said she's not going to be a slave. And it's a very sad story. It upset everybody in Cincinnati. They had, because they had, during the trial, they had, of Margaret Garner, they had people protest outside because, see, that was supposed to be a free area. And are you going to try her there because of that, or are you going to try her in Kentucky? And Kentucky didn't know what they ought to do. And Cincinnati is saying, you got to do something, figure out something. She was in jail. And I write about that some in the first book. That was one thing that became important to me, to know what happened. And I've come across a name that has part her name and part of her maiden name. And I want to follow that through Ancestry.com and see where I can get. See, and I had never thought, I was told everybody was upset, nobody talked about it. I asked Mom about history. Nothing. I don't know. Nobody ever talked to me about anything. And it's because it was devastating for the community.
And that was a huge issue too, right before the Civil War, states that were coming in, that there was this fight whether they'd be free slave states or slave states. Like Kansas was huge. I think Kansas was the catalyst that eventually took us into the war. And how about you, Derek? Any family?
Surprisingly, I had 19 some odd family members who fought for the South. My father's family, the Hankerson side of the family, is actually from a place that's called Hankerson County, South Carolina, which is now Aiken County, South Carolina. And his father's side, or my father's side of the family, is mulatto, which is composed of course, West Africans, British, and Native Americans. And my dad's mother's side of the family, which is from Waterboro and Beaufort, South Carolina, were Gullah Geechee. So not all, I guess what I'm saying is not all slaves were black and not all blacks were slaves, but to the point that you're asking, yes, I had 19 members who fought for the Confederacy, and they formed some of the first militias to protect South Carolina and Georgia. And if you think back to the 1790 figure, 78% of the population in the low country of South Carolina in 1790 were West African. You can logically deduct, and common sense tells you that 100 years later there were still people, to include mulattoes and Africans and Native Americans, who Yamasee Muskogee, who were in the South Carolina area, who fought to protect their homeland, and that homeland was the South. And here again, blacks had lived in the South since Florida's founding in 1513, and here again in St. Augustine in 1565. And the Spanish, the land of Florida, or the territory of Florida, existed from Key West all the way up to Newfoundland, Canada, and all the way over to the Mississippi prior to the 1800s, and mass immigration. So South Carolina was Florida prior to it being named South Carolina after the settlement of General James Oglethorpe. So yes, we also had about 30 members who fought for the North, to include the famous 54th Massachusetts.
Okay. And Judy, where can we purchase this book?
Amazon.com.
Okay.
eBay.
And Murray State University.
And Barnes & Noble.
Oh, and Barnes & Noble's also. All right, so it's quite accessible.
Yes.
All right. Is the book available already?
Yes.
Okay.
The book was released to us on the 29th of July. It was released to the public a week ago.
All right. And here's my last question is, what's the next project for you guys?
Well,
A trilogy.
but yeah, if you follow what we just said, we're into the third book.
Okay. This is the second book you just finished.
That's correct.
And now you're into the third book.
Yes.
And the first book is called, the title is?
All Bones Be White.
All Bones Be White. This one, of course, we've just said that it's belonging, the Civil War, South We Never Knew.
Yeah,
Do you have a title already for the third book?
We're kicking around. We've been kicking around a title for the third book, which would deal, and we don't want to reveal too much because this is intellectual property.
Yes.
But the third book, we're thinking about Florida's Underground Railroad South, because our research has led us to the fact that the Underground Railroad, thanks to the Spanish, and Edict 1693, which was the first civil rights legislation, and then again the Proclamation 1738 established the South, or Spanish Florida, as the original Underground Railroad. So we're thinking about titling the book Florida's Southern Route to Freedom, and focus on how and why the South, or Spanish Florida, was the route to freedom prior to Harriet Tubman's Underground Railroad heading north to Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Canada.
Right.
And that Underground Railroad that headed south did not just stop in Florida. It went to Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and even went to France and Germany. So you have a lot of Africans who were escaping the plight of bondage by seeking freedom in the South, and to
Okay, go
include
somewhere
other
else.
places and other places. Yeah.
Okay. So I had, yes, my question was, it escaped me there for a moment, is if people had comments or wanted to share something, where could they reach you? What email could they reach you at?
I have a Murray State email, which is jshearer@murraystate.edu.
All right.
I also have a website,
Okay.
which is www.judithshearer.com.
And how you spell Shearer?
SHEARER.
Okay, that's how I thought.
Any of that would be nice.
All right.
I should get it all the way around.
Yeah, because people might have comments before they buy a book, and they might have comments after they
That'd
read
be
the book.
great.
And that'd be a great way to reach
Speaking of comments, we're kind of perplexed because there are too many stories that surround both of our families, and not to divulge too much here, my mother is part of the my mother's family is part of that Johnson clan, literally from Tennessee, and Judy talks a lot about Andrew Johnson. And interesting enough, my great grandfather's name was Andrew Jackson Johnson, of course named after the two Tennessee presidents, but also people who were from Tennessee. So when you put that in perspective, and you put it in perspective to Judy's family being part of the Patrick Henry family, we find that our stories are not only too close for comfort with reference to us personally belonging to the book, but we're also doing further research to seeing how we tied together in the story through past relatives. And I mention that because one of the Confederate units that a family member of mine fought for, which was the Texas 2nd Cavalry Mounted Division, was the same division that Kirby Smith fought with and for when he was fighting for the Confederacy. And you know, Kirby Smith is a local St. Augustine resident, and it's just unique how these stories intertwined. So we are taking things in another direction and looking at how DNA might play into our lives also. So wouldn't it be ironic or funny or canny or uncanny if we find that Judy's family and our family are related?
Yes. I always feel that's a big mistake in history, that people try to put history in boxes.
They do.
And they don't realize it's all one big box.
It is.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So I thank you very much, FirstCoast.tv.
Thank you.
I guess this was more a conversation than an interview. I
Yes.
loved it. And thank you for this. And we're looking forward to getting this book, and looking forward to your third book, ending the
Great.
trilogy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jorge.